China and the United States have been working on Bilateral Investment Treaty, or the BIT. But the Chinese side has been urging the United States to finish this task for the current administration before it wraps up its term. Is it possible?
BIT is unlikely to be wrapped up during this term. It's been going on for now, I think, almost 8 years. They've been talking about this. Some 20 meetings have been held on the subject. There's more progress that's been made, but there's more to be made. President Obama and President Xi Jinping are meeting at the end of the month, and I know that something will be on the agenda for them to talk about, but I doubt if it can be concluded.
Where do you think then, Secretary Cohen, are the biggest challenges at this moment?
I think clarification in terms of what are the big issues that still remain to be resolved. I think there's still questions about national interests. I think there are issues about what's on the negative list, how many of the sectors are going to be excluded from the Bilateral Investment Treaty. But I think that progress has been made. More progress can be made before the end of the president's term, but I don't think there's any way it could be completed, and I don't think it's going to be ratified during this term.
Well, you've got different kinds of mechanisms promoted by China and US. You got TPP, Belt and Road Initiative, you got AIIB, and some of the others. Some say these are apparently at least competitive mechanisms. So what do you make of it? Are we going to reconcile the geopolitical and the politics goals vis-a-vis the business benefits for all sides?
What I talked about during a panel discussion was that we still have what I call strategic mistrust. We don't trust each other. And so every motive is questioned. Each ambition is questioned. And so we look at each other through a different end of the lens. And so you're either bigger than you really are, or I'm smaller than I really am. And so what we have to do is to say, for example, TPP initially was seen by the Chinese as being an attempt to economically encircle China by lining up 12 countries on this treaty. We have looked, I know, at China's One Road, One Belt, as this is an attempt by China to create a sphere of influence, economic and geostrategic, to exclude the United States. Then we have the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. We looked at that as saying, well, that's trying to undermine the World Bank. So each of us have to look at this and say, wait a minute, what is the goal? How can it be achieved? Does it work in our interest to be part of the Asia Investment Development Bank? And the answer, I think, is yes. Does it work in the interest of the Chinese to become eventually part of the TPP? That may be just esoteric and kind of just philosophizing about it now, because we don't see any movement made in the United States to take up TPP this year. So it becomes almost academic for the time being. But I think we have to look and see how each of these initiatives can work to the benefit of each country. And that only can come about through business, talking to each other, and sitting down and working through our differences.
As a veteran Republican, what do you make, Secretary Cohen, of the latest situation in the Republican primary?
Well, it's been disappointing in the sense that the debate itself has not been at a very high level in my judgment.
There's a big question mark on your head, and you can't do that to the party. You really can't. You can't do that to the party.
I think too often it's been what we call ad hominem, namely very personal.
I will say, even for Donald, though, he reached a new low. Donald, you're a sniveling coward, and leave Heidi the hell alone.
Very degrading at times, and a bit too crude in my sense, that I think the debate should be conducted at a much higher level.
How divided, Secretary Cohen, is the Republican Party now?
It's divided. How deep the divisions are remains to be seen. You have people on the right or the far right that are very ideological in the sense that they are not willing to bend on any issue. You have people who were once in the middle who no longer are there. So you have a situation in which there's been an inversion where virtues that were once celebrated, namely promoting free trade, promoting internationalism, promoting much more engagement in world affairs has become something of a negative. Namely, there is a strong opposition now to free trade. There's also a movement underway on both parties, not only Republican but Democrats as well, to reduce our commitment, certainly at a military level, but to reduce our commitment to start reinvesting back at home. So it's one of pulling back, turning inward, and I think that that is not good for America, and it's not good for world stability. It's not good for our relations with China either. But that seems to be the prevailing sentiment right now. There's a lot of anger on the part of people who think that the future is not going to be as promising as it once was.
How much chance do you think Donald Trump would become the nominee of the Republican Party?
I think we have to anticipate he's likely to be the candidate of the Republican Party.
What would that mean?
Well, we don't know much about him in terms of what his philosophy is. It seems to be more isolationist, I think, than from what I can tell. He wants to focus upon rebuilding the infrastructure and the economy of the United States. Like most Republicans, he is concerned about the size of the national debt, which is $19 trillion. That should be of concern to China as well, since you have been investing in the United States. And so having a debt that continues to grow at $500 billion every year is not something that's sustainable. So focusing on that is important. But I think how we focus on it, not only what we say, but how we say it becomes important in diplomatic circles. So it's hard to say what his policy is. We barely know who his advisors are. As he has said, the only person he really consults is himself.
Some have been suggesting, Secretary Cohen, that the Republican Party has done it to itself. Look at what was going on before this. The Tea Party and all the political extremes, they say this is only a continuation of what happened over the past few years, the Donald Trump phenomenon.
I think it goes back to years ago during the Goldwater years in terms of looking at government as part of the problem and not as part of a solution. So there's been an anti-government sentiment, there's been an anti-bureaucratic sentiment. You rail against the bureaucrats in the system, and these are the people who make the wheels of government turn. And that's been going on for some years now. And so we have been sort of demeaning, always running against Washington rather than running for it. And the irony is people run for high office to get to Washington, so they say that they can either downgrade it or return power to the state. So it's been going on for some time. This is the culmination right now of what we're seeing.
How does the current situation, Secretary Cohen, compare to your time when you were serving as a Republican in a Democrat administration?
In my judgment, I don't think the United States has made a decision on what role it wants to play and needs to play in this century. I think there's great division taking place and debate taking place now. Should we be more engaged or less engaged? I think the world is more dangerous when we're less engaged. I think when we disengage diplomatically, economically, and even militarily, that creates a dynamic which is not in our interests. And to give you an example, in the Middle East right now, I think the perception is that the United States has been removing its presence. We've had President Putin move in and establish a military presence in Syria. And so that changes the dynamic in that region. The Europeans have felt that we were somewhat disengaged from Europe and no longer have their security interests as much in our upper mind as we once did. And then we have the situation here in the Asia Pacific, of course, in which there's still questions about what the role of the United States is going to be, and what they call the Thucydides trap, namely when you have a rising power, which is China, and the United States being an established power. How do you manage that relationship? And historically, it has not gone well. And if you go back to all of the conflicts that have taken place in the past. So it's really incumbent upon business leaders as well as political leaders to say that we have to establish ties which will hold us together during tough and rough waters.
Secretary Cohen, where do you think the Republican Party is really going from here?
I don't like the direction in terms of the focus inward. I want to continue to focus on international trade, and I want to focus on building bridges, as we say, and not walls. And that sounds like an endorsement of Hillary Clinton, but it's not.
First time that you're a Democrat.
But it's not. But no, I think we have to build relationships and not talk about how we're walling each other off from one another. And so I think the rhetoric has to be toned down, and I think the reality has to be toned down that once someone gets to an office as high as the President of the United States, all of the statements that are made before, they become rather obsolete in the sense the reality of governing a country becomes so complex and so important that you put away all of the mottos and the slogans you've used to get elected.
Well, you know, before we go, Secretary Cohen, you understand very well that the Chinese have been watching the American elections for quite some time. This year also. At this moment, we see that Hillary Clinton might be the one coming from the Democratic Party. Of course, Mr. Sanders could also have his chance. But on the other hand, the Republican Party, very likely Mr. Trump will be the nominee for quite extent. What would that mean if these two, or any of these two, become #1 of the United States? What does that mean for U.S.-China relations?
Well, I think they're probably more comfortable at this point with Hillary Clinton in terms of they know her. She served as Secretary of State, First Lady in the White House, and U.S. Senator. So her record and how she conducts herself is much clearer than Mr. Trump, whose record is one of being a private entrepreneur and business magnate. So we don't know much about his views other than what we've heard to date, which seem to be, again, more disengaged, more focused inward, more, I would say, isolationist in terms of pulling back from world involvement. We have to wait and see. I think if you look at it demographically, Mrs. Clinton has an edge going into the election, but much will depend upon how many people turn out. Does she have the same drawing power as Barack Obama? Does she have the same drawing power as President Bill Clinton? And that's to be determined. If they have a big turnout, then looking at it demographically between the black population, Hispanic population, young people, etc., you would think that she has the edge. But turnout becomes critical, and Donald Trump has a lot of momentum going right now. He may not become the nominee, but the chances are he will be. So I think everybody's going to sit back and say, what happens now?